Hello everyone, it's Dylan from Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. I am joined by the one and only Rarity fangirl for another episode of Appreciating Yu-Gi-Oh! For those of you that may have missed the first episode, we went a deep dive into the original incredible Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, and this is the series where we want to talk mostly positively. You know, we'll give our honest opinions on everything across the board, but this is a series where we want to appreciate and look back on every aspect of this wonderful and now very, very lengthy Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, between all the mangas we've gotten, all the anime we have gotten, and all the movies we have gotten. And this episode will encapsulate the movie and the manga being Transcend Game, and the movie being Dark Side of Dimensions. So Rarity, I'll bring her in right now. Rarity, how are you doing on this fine evening?
I'm doing so well. Thank you for having me on again, and I am so excited to talk about DSOD and Transcend Game. I actually rewatched the movie in English and Japanese for this video, and I reread Transcend Game like 4 times just to make sure that I was fully immersed in my thoughts, that I cannot wait to share it with all of our lovely audience.
That is amazing. Yeah, now I did see DSOD again. I've seen it now probably 3, maybe 4 times. Saw it like 6 months ago, so I feel like my memory of it is pretty decent. And then I reread Transcend Game about a month ago. Transcend Game, for those of you that don't know, is super short. 2 chapters, very short. It serves as kind of a bridge from the manga ending to the movie Dark Side of Dimensions. And I think a good place that I want to start is with the canon element of Dark Side of Dimensions, because a lot of people, I still think, get confused when it comes to Dark Side of Dimensions and its placement in the timeline. This is a movie that is a sequel to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, which is different than the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, and I only say that because I do think most people have, there's a lot of people that have watched Duel Monsters that have not read the original manga, and there are pretty significant differences. I think one of my favorite comments that I got when I talked about Dark Side of Dimensions a while back, someone said, you know, it's crazy to me that Pegasus wasn't in this movie. He was like the creator of the game, and they even gave like little appearances to Rex and Weevil. It's crazy they didn't include Pegasus. And Pegasus, as you know, Rarity, is not alive in Dark Side of Dimensions, because in the manga, you know, he dies. So I think that's kind of a good place to start. Did you have any like difficulty between like the fact that Dark Side of Dimensions was this manga sequel only and not an anime sequel?
Initially I'd say yes, because at the time I don't think I had read the manga all the way through, but I basically Googled it, so... And I watched probably just as you did. I watched the dub first because that was the first one released. Mm-hmm. We actually never got an official international Japanese release because, of course, we didn't. So it was pretty easy to kind of figure it out from the way of, like, because the plot doesn't make sense otherwise. Like, the plot literally doesn't make sense if it's off the anime timeline. But I remember keeping up with the news at the time because this was around when Arc 5 was airing, and I realized, hey, the Japanese version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Exists. So I think by that point, I figured it out pretty quickly. But I can understand the confusion, especially because if you're watching the dub, they don't reference any canon events, but, you know, it's the same animation studio. We've never had in Yu-Gi-Oh! A anime direct adaptation of something connected to the manga before so closely. Because even Season 0, which I'm sure we'll get to in another video, is very different from the original manga in terms of including Kaiba more. Because the whole Kaiba storyline in Season 0 is not like the manga at all. Because Kaiba basically shows up at the beginning, and then he doesn't show up till Def T. There's like a bunch of stuff they added to basically like try to make it a full storyline.
Yeah, 100%. So just always like to start there when talking about Dark Side of Dimensions, especially for a deep dive video like this one. Transcend Game I actually want to start with first, Rarity, because I think that is a good starting point because it, you know, leads into Dark Side of Dimensions. For those that might not know, I think there's probably a decent amount of people that never read Transcend Game. It is, again, a 2-chapter manga, very easy to find, very quick to read, that came out April 11th and then April 18th of 2016, and then Dark Side of Dimensions in Japan came out April 23rd. So this was kind of a way to kind of get some hype around the movie. It was the first time in many years Kaiba and well, actually not really Yugi. Kaiba was featured in a manga, and it is a I think it's a real missed opportunity, and I've talked about this before. Would love to know your opinion on it, Rarity. I would have loved to see the stuff in Transcend Game animated to start the Dark Side of Dimensions movie. I feel like if they, or even if it wasn't at the start of the movie, but I feel like it would have only been 5-10 minutes tops. I think it would have been a really badass way to introduce Sarah. I think it would have been a great connection between Duel Links, which at the time was a mobile app that was starting up, worldwide, and now Duel Links, 8 years later, is this massive conglomerate, one of the biggest money income producers that the Yu-Gi-Oh! IP has. So I think it would have been cool to see like the creation of Duel Links in the manga form, because that really is kind of what Transcend Game is. There's a lot of people that don't know that, but Duel Links is name dropped a few times throughout those 2 chapters. And I think it would have been a good way to kind of tease what was going to happen at the end of the movie. But overall, Transcend Game really does set the stage in a really cool way, introducing Sarah, introducing this new technology, and of course, ultimately giving the fans a knowledge of what can come with Kaiba potentially traveling and successfully being able to get back to Atem. But what were your thoughts overall on the Transcend Game manga?
I want to first talk about that Transcend Game's art is absolutely incredible. Like, Takahashi, it looks different. If you compare the style of it to the original manga, obviously there's difference. There was over like 10 plus years since Takahashi had drawn in a manga form, at least for Yu-Gi-Oh! In a way that we know of. He could have worked on personal pieces that he never posted. People do things all the time they don't necessarily give to the public. Because Takahashi did continue to draw Yu-Gi-Oh! Art for certain things, even like card arts and things like that. I personally do think it was cool that we kind of saw what the prototype as well for the new Duel Disk was, because they essentially, the whole Duel Links thing was basically a prototype for the Crystal Cloud network that basically connects, that Kaiba was showing off with the new Duel Disk in the film. So that's kind of what it's talking about. And it's really cool. There's a panel you can see of all the other Duel Disk models. You can see the Duelist Kingdom one. You can see the Battle City one. Really, really nice little detail there.
Yeah.
But one of the coolest things besides the artwork was, this is the first time, I believe, in the manga, unless you don't count the scene in the Ishizu duel, that we see Kasara interact with Kaiba. Because you see her for a second, which I really kind of love that. As I mentioned in the manga video, pre-Seto and Kasara's storyline, I always want an expansion upon. And we'll probably say this in the Duel Monsters video. I think the fact that Kaiba got to meet Kasara in the anime timeline was great. And I'll probably go in more into that again in the DM video. But I really liked that connection of everything, that kind of like beneath Blue Eyes' essence, you see the person who became the dragon. You see Atem, and you see Sarah trying to stop Kaiba, but at the same time, she indirectly probably gave him the idea to go after the Pharaoh anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of like an interesting, girl, if you could have just shut your mouth. But most likely because it was Kaiba, he probably would have figured it out eventually, most likely. But I really liked the, again, seeing the art. I loved that Mokuba got a little moment of saving his brother from going too far, which is very in character for him. So I liked that. And kind of just showing how far Kaiba was willing to go. And again, foreshadowing the end of the movie. I think I would have loved to see it animated, like you said. I mean, I'm always up for seeing things for the manga animated. Like, I'm sure, again, we'll talk about this in the DM video. But I would love to see more of the manga content animated from any of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Mangas, especially the Arc 5 manga. That will never happen, but my dub's the next best thing. But I think that it would have been really cool, and I could see it could be a bit of a missed opportunity, but I also think that you can see DSOD without the pre-knowledge and still understand the film fine. So it just 100%. Gives more context. They wrote it in a way where it's like, oh, this is cool supplemental stuff, even though I think it's pretty necessary to understand the whole context. But I thought it was, again, I would love to have seen it animated, and that would have been a cool way for Kaiba's first. But then again, Kaiba dueling Atem at the beginning, I think, is like a really cool way to have Kaiba be formally introduced to the film. So there's some pros and cons in there, I think.
You could also have it maybe 20, 30 minutes in 6 months later, like a 6 months later flashback, and then have it go for 5 minutes. That way you still have Kaiba and Atem be that first duel, and then you do like a rewind. So there were ways to maybe do that, because I actually do agree with you. Kaiba and Atem being that opening duel is really, really cool and hype, and that's the duel that everybody wants to see, if we're just, being honest. I also love how in Transcend Game, the very final panel, I believe it's the final panel or it's towards the very end, where you have Aigami make his appearance. I actually do think it is the final panel. And he talks about Kaiba a little bit, and that was a really cool way to introduce him. To your point, I did not read, and definitely let us know in the comments below if you've read Transcend Game, if you read it after the movie. I read it after the movie, and I felt like I didn't really need to read it in order to understand the movie. After reading it, it definitely added some context that was definitely well appreciated, that maybe I kind of wish I had before I saw the movie. But it's one of those mangas that, you definitely don't need to read it, but you get added benefit from having read it. I think of it kind of like Sevens and Go Rush, which are the two most current anime in the franchise, where there's a lot of references in Go Rush to Yu-Gi-Oh! Sevens that watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Sevens would give you some benefits of having knowledge of, but it's not a requirement in order to understand most of what's going on. So very, very similar in that regard. But Transcend Game, so definitely let us know your thoughts on that down below in the comments. And then we get to the movie. We get to Dark Side of Dimensions, which is, in my opinion, I guess we'll start here, the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie ever made. A great conclusion to the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! Rarity, in comparison to the other two movies, I don't really count the Toei Season 0 movie. Do you think this is this your favorite movie? Do you think it's the best movie?
Oh, absolutely. If not, just for the animation quality alone. Now, obviously, I don't know how this affected Arc-V's production, if at all. There's a bunch of rumors about that. Whether that was the case or not, all the people who worked on Dark Side of Dimensions, which Takahashi himself got to animate that sequence of Yuki putting on the dual disc, by the way, in case you guys didn't know that.
Yep.
All of the people who worked on Yu-Gi-Oh! Came back for this film, both in terms of the English and Japanese voice actors, in terms of a lot of the animation staff. I believe the composer is also the same, if I remember correctly. All these people came back, and it feels like, obviously there's some differences. People sound slightly different because, time has passed or characters aged up. Mokuba, for instance, sounds older because he is older now, for example. But all of the work, all of the redesigns, oh my gosh, Mokuba's redesign is peak. The dude, got a glow up with the haircut. Aw, I love my son. He is beautiful. I love Kaiba's suit, that it's clearly inspired by the old one, but it's technically upgraded. He also worked at the gym, good inspiring all the gym bros out there. I loved, get to see Duke Devlin or Ryuju again. It was good to see him and his dad. His dad was finally animated, so that was cool. We got to see him. That was very
cool, yeah.
We got to see him. There was some good humor. It was an overall enjoyable time, and I'm sure we're going to talk about us seeing the movie, which I think I mentioned this in the manga video. I saw DSOD with my mom, and my mom is my biggest supporter. I love my mom. She knows nothing about anime. I'm trying to get her to watch the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Slowly. She freaked out at Kaiba ripping up the blue eyes, and it was hilarious. She's just like a little kid in that regard. But I remember just, because I had no one else to go with at the time, and I basically begged my mom to go with me because I didn't want to go alone. So I was like, hey, Mom, you want to go with me? And so we did, and there were cosplayers in the room. Everyone was cheering. It was a fun theater experience, one of the funnest I've ever had. And funny story, so the movie actually blacked out for us. What happened was when Kaiba went to the afterlife, because that entire end sequence doesn't have dialogue after he does the launching of the system. That's the last line of the film. Because it's all just instrumental at that point. The movie literally blacked out for us, and we literally thought the movie was over. Then we walked out of the theater. Then the theater people were like, oh, for Yu-Gi-Oh, come back in. We're going to rewind the movie. There was a glitch. And we basically got to see them slowly rewind the film to where we were. Never had that happen in a movie theater in my life. But super, super memorable. And it's a great, great film. So, Dylan, I know you have a very unique story of how you first saw the film that I'm sure older people of the channel will remember. So, would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and by the way, I've never had that either, where a movie just went black and they had to rewind it for any reason. So, yeah, 4K ran a contest that you could sign up for free. And if you won the contest, they would basically bring you to New York City, put you in a hotel for the weekend, and then you could see the premiere of the movie a few days prior to the movie actually being released in the States. I entered and I won. That thumbnail, by the way, is horrifying. It's still up. I don't know what I was doing when I made that thumbnail. I'll have it on screen right now. That video of me winning is still up. Shockingly, there was a conspiracy theory that people in my community had that they picked me because they knew who I was. I don't believe that. I really don't.
1,000% don't. I don't think they would. But even though you are amazing and you have worked with them currently after that point, but
right, it was right. That's the thing. It was so early, right? It was 2017. It was like right. It was like 2 weeks after I made the timeline theory. Like my channel was still very, very like in its infancy stage compared to the 7 years I've put into it since. But so I don't really believe that, but that's kind of like a running gag now. So I won the contest. They flew me out, me and Nick T, who you guys who have watched the Talking Yu-Gi-Oh podcast, I'm sure know, went out. We stayed in a hotel in Chelsea, New York, and then we watched the movie in a theater with all the voice actors and producers and people who worked on the movie. So I was in the theater with, Dan Green and Eric Stewart. They were sitting in the back. I remember when the movie ended and I walked out, I walked right past both of them. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be like, annoying or intrusive or anyway, but it was kind of surreal being able to watch this movie in the same room with all of them. And even though I didn't see him in the theater, there was a very renowned guest who spoke after the movie ended in like the break area, and that was Kazuki Takahashi. I still have that recording somewhere on my phone, but I was probably 20 feet from Takahashi in a room with 50 people. He thanked everybody for their support. This was after the movie ended. So yeah, I was in the same room as Takahashi. Sadly, I could not go to the after party because Nick T and I both were not really feeling well, so we ended up going back to the hotel. And actually, the person who organized the contest emailed me or texted me like 20 minutes after we left and asked where we were and wanted to talk to us. So that's like a big regret that I wasn't able to stay. But we especially me, I just was not feeling well, which that kind of stinks because I would have, had I stayed, I may have been able to meet Takahashi or talk to some of the voice actors. But yeah, definitely one of, if not the coolest experience I've ever had. And yeah, I remember going back to the hotel and then like recording the review in the hotel room and uploading it the next day. And yeah, it was really just a surreal experience, but definitely one that I will always cherish for the rest of my life.
I couldn't have happened to a nicer person, honestly. You really
thank you. I
it.
appreciate that.
I'm glad you got to really have that beautiful experience. No, I'm serious. Like, obviously, I would have loved to have been there, but I'm happy that this is the thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Creating those special experiences, especially when you're in an anime film. Like, funny enough, I saw Spy Family Code White yesterday with a friend. That movie is really good, by the way. I know it's not Yu-Gi-Oh!, but that movie is really good. But going to a film, an anime film, is one of the funnest things in a theater you can do.
Yeah.
Like, even if you're not necessarily a fan of the franchise, I brought my friend who wasn't super into Spy Family to the movie with me. Like, I brought my mom to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. The fandom experience was so much fun. Because normally when I go to movies, like, they're generally not very, like, lively, but everyone was, like, cheering and, like, squealing and, like, all that stuff. Like, the audience reaction made the film so much better. So DSOD, of course, will always have that special place, because I never saw Bonds Beyond Time in theaters, unfortunately. I would have loved to, or Pyramid of Light with the rerun. But as for the content of the film itself, to get back on that, I love that the film is focused on Kaiba, and it's basically his cycle of grief. That's literally the movie's about grief, which we'll talk about the ending at some point in this video because we have to. But it was really cool to kind of see Kaiba's essentially denial of it, which I'm not sure if you picked this up or not, Dylan, but it's very much, I imagine, mirrors the grief that Priest Seto went through. Because I imagine, like, when the puzzle was broken, right? I imagine that Atem would have told the priest, like, hey, you should probably destroy the puzzle so Zork doesn't come back. And then Priest Seto was like, you know what? I can't accept that. You're going to come back and you're going to win this time. Like, because he most likely set up the Pharaoh's return with the tablet and most likely the Tomb Keepers and all that stuff. He was Pharaoh at the time. He must have. That must have been what his job was. And Kaiba's kind of going through a similar kind of grief. And in the end, he really gets to have that closure, which is very much good for him. I think, and it was also nice for him to finally acknowledge Yugi, similar to in the original Japanese anime, acknowledge Yugi as someone, independent of the Pharaoh, and that he truly did inherit the King of Games title. The movie was also great for Yugi. What a glow up. As a Yugi Moto fan, not that I don't love Atem, it was great to see Yugi really get to shine as a duelist, as a person, and I love that he wanted to become a game creator. That's just really, really fitting for him, honestly. It was just nice to see everybody again. Like, this kind of thing doesn't happen too often after an anime has ended for this long. And while, yes, there was a lot of nostalgia pandering, it clearly very much tried to be its own thing with the Aigami situation, with the dimension duels, and all the extra concepts. It truly took advantage of all of its elements to make a really good, memorable experience. I think every character, for the most part, at least got a little moment. Like, Mokuba got the headbutt on Aigami, he got the interrogation seed, Anzu got some nice stuff at the beginning. We got the cool scene with Jonochi, with remembering Atem and overcoming that. We got the Bakura backstory. We got more info on Shadi. We got, like, all of these things coming together. And
I know.
Yeah, you can be like, why wasn't some of this stuff mentioned before? Well, you kind of have to take that when you're dealing with a film that brings up new elements that weren't addressed before, just like you would of a new story arc, for example. It's kind of one of those things in stories you kind of just have to, like, as long as it doesn't contradict anything, you're kind of just like, okay. And things like that. So I have to ask you, Dylan, do you think the movie was too long? Because I remember in the theater, they kind of crammed all of the duels towards the end of the film. Do you think there was either a pacing issue? Do you think it was too long? I mean, 2 hours of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is great, but I do think the back end, like, I don't think the the Yami Bakura / Possessed Diva duel needed to happen. And it was cool to see Yugi and Kaiba team up, but I feel like that was just something they threw in to give the movie kind of a bigger climax.
Well, I think they also wanted to have a scene that it made sense for Atem to come back for, and I think Atem coming back to dueling the ultimate evil threat makes more sense than dueling, Kaiba. Because Kaiba, at the end of the day, is not a possibly world-ending threat like Aigami and the Millennium Ring, Zork combination was. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question about, I have the running time up here, 131 minutes. I remembered it being long. I thought it was like an hour 50. I did not realize it was over 2 hours. So for me, make it 3 hours, right? Like, I don't care. Like, I'd sit happily through a 3-hour movie. And that's the thing, right? You say, well, but what about, like, the casual fans? But, like, this is, like, the final story of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't think there's many casual non-Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans that are going to see this movie. Now, I say that and I'm talking to you, and your mom obviously is not a Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan and went to see it.
She went for me. She went to see me happy.
She went to see it to go with you, and that was very, very nice of her. And you're obviously the hardcore Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan. I think 90% of the people seeing this movie are hardcore fans of the original series or of the game, and I don't think a majority of them would mind sitting through a longer movie, especially if it means wrapping up the story in a conclusive way. There's probably other people that do feel the movie was too long, but I don't know. I just feel like this is the final chapter of Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah.
We're never going to probably see these characters again in any form, as I feel even more confident saying that now, sadly, with the passing of Takahashi. I don't think they're ever going to touch this series again. I don't think they should touch this series again, in all honesty, because I think this is just a perfect conclusion. And the length is definitely long, but I feel like it works for the final chapter.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, long movies, I generally get tired watching long movies, which is why I like watching TV, because, you can, or watching things at home, right, you can pause. But thinking about it from that perspective, yeah. You mentioned again about Atem. So, how do we feel about Atem coming back? Because this is very mixed in the fandom. What is your opinion? Because I have thoughts.
Yeah, right. I've seen over the years that Atem coming back kind of undercuts little Yugi and kind of takes the spotlight away from him. I know that's like a very big take that a lot of people have. And then, right, the other element is logistically, does it even work? Like, does it make sense from a plot and continuity standpoint? I remember when it happened in the scene, in the movie, it was one of my favorite scenes. Right there with Kaiba
so
summoning
good.
Obelisk from the ground. Those were like my two favorite scenes. Just such an incredible moment. Is it a little convoluted? Absolutely. And I would never argue against that. But I just feel like the whole movie, Kaiba trying to bring Atem back, and then only for him to like be passed out at that point and, you know, be out of that duel. And then Atem actually does come back.
Such
Doesn't
a
say a
Yugioh
word.
thing.
Takahashi animates it, and Atem basically finishes the duel off. Is such a badass moment. I love it, but I definitely understand a lot of the criticism behind it, and the fact that maybe it doesn't make the most sense continuity wise. But I love it. I mean, I love the scene. Yeah, I guess I am kind of mixed on it because like the other part of me, like, no, I know deep down it really doesn't make sense, and I also know that like you know, it does take away from Yugimoto a little bit that the Pharaoh comes back, has to bail him out, doesn't say a word, finishes off Aigami, but like I don't know, it is like an inner battle. Like it's my first opinion of it is like, oh my god, it's amazing, I'm happy they did it, and then the logic part of my brain starts to combat that. But
that's literally me.
Yeah,
Because in a vacuum, the scene is beautifully done. The music in both versions is great. Basically remixes of the character signature themes. The fact it was Mahad who finished it off, perfection. Love that. Mahad, great. Love to see him. So that was awesome. It was beautifully it was animated beautifully. The colors were super nice. And it was nice for Yugi to get to see Atem again, even again if the whole movie's about grief and the guy kind of coming back. But I guess the whole point, I guess, is sort of... I guess if you see the film more as a thing about closure than grief, I guess is probably more, I guess, the best word for it, actually, now that I think about it. Because Yugi got that closure of Atem. Atem probably, you know, got to see Yugi being strong or whatever and came back from the afterlife and, you know, all that. And Kaiba gets the closure at the end of getting to duel Atem. Because I do not believe he died. Because I personally believe in Takahashi's Spear of Femme concept art. If you guys haven't seen it, I'm sure Dylan will flash it up. It's the only, like, post-movie, one of the only post-movie things we have. And Takahashi said it was a possible ending. But Yugi and Kaiba battling in space in a new game of Yugi's where he won the game contest, and him and Kaiba collaborating together. That's big steps forward for all of them. And perhaps Kaiba will learn the power of friendship? Probably not. Maybe just Yugi. I've always kind of seen that Kaiba probably only likes Yugi and Atem, probably the only people he would ever trust besides his brother, right? So it's kind of nice development that he's collaborating with someone to that extent. And we know Kaiba doesn't just do it because it's probably Yugi, it's because he believes in the idea, because Kaiba isn't that kind of sentimental when it comes especially to business. So it's a really heartwarming thing. That's the thing I think about. But the read that he did die is also extremely valid, and you've seen it probably all over the fandom, people debating about what the ending is. But regardless, I think it was very, very powerful. Even if, again, there's some leaps in logic, like how did Kaiba figure out how the cube works to then combine it with his technology? Where did the cube even come from? Why didn't Shadi bring this up before? Because it's not a part of the original 7. Is it a more modern artifact that was made? Again, there's some logic you could think about, but I think a movie like Yu-Gi-Oh, as we know, Yu-Gi-Oh is a rabbit hole, right? Yu-Gi-Oh tends to go down and down, and if you think too hard about it, it probably doesn't make as much sense as you think. But that's what's great about Yu-Gi-Oh, right? You can just have some fun. And I think this movie definitely delivered on a fun and very satisfying experience. The music was really good. Like, Preseto's theme playing when Kaiba goes back to the afterlife was great and great on symbolism. The voice performances were great. Everybody from English and Japanese sides, they all put their heart into this film, and you could really, really see that. So I think that's what I like to take away from it. It's just, it was a love letter to Yu-Gi-Oh! Just like this video series that we're doing right now.
Yeah, and I mean... Very, very well said on the ending. You know, Takahashi, I think, did a great job of keeping it ambiguous, really leaving it up to the viewer to determine whether Kaiba died or whether that ending of Kaiba and Yugi, you know, dueling in the space station that I'll have up is a real ending. And him saying it's a possible ending, you know, just kind of adds to the the notion that he wanted this to be ambiguous. I also don't believe that Kaiba died. I think he's just too intelligent to do that, and I think
too
even if he
stubborn
was
to
successful
die
in getting back to Egypt, and I think he was, definitely. I mean, that's what the movie showed us. I think he had a backup plan or a contingency plan on how to get back or use the dual links to maybe get back to his world or something along those lines. Like, I think it's easy enough to conclude that because he's just such an intelligent guy, and he's 16 years old. And so, you know, in another 16 years, what's the tech going to look like? What's he going to be able to create?
Like,
I wouldn't put time travel ability being like past him, even if he is back in Egypt, and just because of how intelligent he is. So, yeah, I think that there is enough there to say that he probably didn't die, but definitely an interesting ending. A lot of, there are a few things that you can look at here that don't really make a lot of sense, but a character we really have not talked about that I want to discuss briefly is Aigami, because I think Aigami gets overlooked a lot. Because this is like, the first time we see Yugi and Kaiba in 14, 15 years, and that's what everybody wants to see, including me. I mean, I wanted to see all the characters back, Joey back, all of them. But Aigami played such a wonderful villain. I still think he is a top 10 villain in the franchise. Like, I liked him that much, and I thought even the voice acting of the dub, Daniel J. Edwards, did such a great job with his character, and it's hard to come into that role.
I can't.
I'm just speaking from Aigami's perspective. When you have Yugi and Kaiba having such star power within the community, you had to have a villain that worked for this movie to be successful. Look at Pyramid of Light. That villain I thought was terrible. I can't even...
Anubis.
Horrible. And by the way, that movie was not good. Like, I don't think Pyramid of Light was a good movie. I think Yugi and Kaiba needed a foil, and Aigami was a perfect villain for this movie. And I thought he was incredibly threatening, and even the ideological battle that he was facing between Shadi wanting to, let everything go and not give in to anger and hatred versus him wanting to give in to anger and hatred because he saw Bakura just murk Shadi right in front of him, all those years ago, was such a great inner battle to see. So I feel like he's a character that we haven't really discussed much, that I don't know if you felt as positively as I did, but I thought he was wonderful in the movie.
I think Aigami fits in really well. I love his design. His design fits in with the Yugioh universe. Takahashi did design him, as well as Sarah and the other characters for the Prana or Plana, depending on which version you're watching, because the pronunciation's different. I really loved all of them. I really liked the connection to Shadi. They felt like it was nice to connect him and his past. Like, it's kind of interesting because he has similar to a bad backstory thing that someone like Kaiba has. He's a very good foil to Kaiba, because they're both older siblings, right? And Kaiba obviously likes to give in to hatred and anger. That's kind of his whole thing, right?
Yep.
And so does Aigami. But Kaiba is also someone who very much is against war. And he kind of says that in the Japanese version when he's making the dual disc speech, right? About how people fight these foolish battles, which re-listening to that is like thinking about world events right now about fighting. And obviously, like, again, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is more potent, I think, than ever, at least the original series' message. About, people coming together who were different and things like that, right? But I think he was a great foil to that, and I think his powers are really cool. I loved his deck because it literally takes advantage of the way dimension dueling works, because you take no battle damage, right? So him having 0 attack monsters literally is good, because he won't take any damage when they're destroyed.
Right.
So his deck was made perfectly, basically, to utilize that, and the cubic monsters are really, really cool. And I'm really happy that he got to, overcome that in the end. He got to be with his sister, go on a new road, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters often do. And I do wish that we got an interaction. I feel the same way. We'll talk about this in the DM video, because there's been a lot of quite parallels to Kaiba and Mokuba. You could say Siegfried and Leon were also parallels as well. They don't really do the Mokuba part very well. Like, I would have loved to see Mokuba and Sarah interact, because, again, parallels, right? Just I wish Mokuba and Leon could have interacted as well. It's kind of like the half of it, of that parallel. But I really did think Aigami was perfect for this film. I loved him, like, kind of softening up with Bakura a little bit after he basically said, it was the spirit of the ring, it was not me. And Bakura crying. I cried in the theater. Seeing him cry hurt my heart to death.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Aigami, perfect for this film. I love that he is in the vein of Yu-Gi-Oh characters where... Because most of the original Yu-Gi-Oh characters have a reason. Because obviously a good villain has to have motivation as to why. And to be argued them wanting to stop the Pharaoh coming back, you know, for... I'm not sure why the Pharaoh coming back gets rid of their powers, but again, the plot, right? You know.
Yep.
I think it made it really, really nice. And I think that them basically having a shadow army of children was really scary. Like... And he survived the Yu-Gi-Oh gun thing in his own way. He got to survive the classic Yu-Gi-Oh guns, which the dub didn't censor. And I remember everyone in the theater, I was there like, oh, the gun's not censored. Because they didn't censor the gun. But yeah, Aigami, great stage presence by both Daniel J. Edwards and I forget what his seiyu's name is. And coming in there, yeah, he really did take that stage presence. And I kind of like that he basically probably was moling out in Yugi school for a little bit. As classic Yu-Gi-Oh villains go, transfer students. There was Kaiba, there was Bakura. It kind of just happens when a villain usually will infiltrate the main character's schooling at some point. So he fit that as well.
Yeah, I don't remember if Duke transferred or if he just showed up.
I think he transferred.
Yeah,
I believe
so
he was also,
it really is a theme.
They all just go to school for like a chapter and then they just do their evil plot. Except Bakura stuck around.
That is too funny. That is too funny, man. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's a good point. But
the only one is not Merrick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if there's anything really else that you want to touch on here, but ultimately, I mean, everybody watching, obviously, Rarity and I are both very high on this movie. We both feel this is the best Yu-Gi-Oh movie that was ever made. I don't know if Rarity agrees with me on this. I think it's the best Yu-Gi-Oh movie by far. Like, and that's not to, well, Pyramid of Light is a joke. And I just think Bonds Beyond Time, while the concept was super cool, was like very short and felt very fan servicey. And while this one definitely had its element of fan service, because obviously it's the old characters, it didn't feel like it was driven by fan service. It felt like there was a genuine story and conclusion here. And I think that's what makes this movie stand out above the others.
1,000%. And we'll get to Bonds Beyond Time eventually. I imagine we'll probably stick it somewhere in the 5Ds era, considering it is canon.
We'll
somewhere over there. But absolutely, it's a work of love. Not just saying the other movies didn't have obviously effort put into them. I mean, the English dub of Pyramid of Light has all the English card text. You rarely see that.
Right.
So that I think this movie also had it, if I remember correctly, as well. I believe it did, and I think Bonds Beyond Time did, but I don't necessarily remember. But again, there's a bunch of like effort that people put into things. As a creative myself, I really appreciate all the effort that was put into this, but I really do feel like this was made from a genuine place. And I remember the interviews between Dan Green and Eric Stewart, like saying how happy they were to come back. I wish we heard from more people like Wayne Grayson, who played Joey, or some of the, I'm sure the Japanese actors got interviews, but I don't know if they've been, translated. But like, it's just incredible to see them come back. And like, we even have these actors coming back, like the Tokyo Dome event. I believe there were some voice actor duels at the Tokyo Dome event as well. The people who were involved in Yu-Gi-Oh! Love Yu-Gi-Oh! And keep coming back. And that's what I think is really so powerful about Yu-Gi-Oh! I was talking to a friend of mine who's trying to come back into the fandom. I'm like, you don't really leave the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fandom. You just take a break from it for a while. That's kind of, I think, what happens more than anything else. So, Dark Side of Dimensions, great film. And I'm happy to have discussed it with Dylan today. And yeah, I love it. It's a great film.
Absolutely. It was great having you on, Rarity. And guys, please keep the discussion going down below in the comments. Let us know your thoughts on Dark Side of Dimensions. Did you like it as much as we did? What were some of your favorite elements? Maybe some things that you wish they did a little differently? Let us know down below. And I'll end on this. For 6 years, every 6 years, starting in 2004, we got a Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. Pyramid of Light in 2004. Bonds Beyond Time 2010, Dark Side of Dimensions was 2016. At the time of recording this, it's been 8 years. There's no sign of another Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie coming anytime soon. I really do hope that I do not look back on this video in 5 years and say, wow, the end of this video is still true. And that is me saying this. Dark Side of Dimensions is the last Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie we have ever gotten. I really, really think that there is an environment where we can get another Yu-Gi-Oh movie. Doesn't have to be OG based. I think Duel Links has made that very, very possible with some sort of
1000%.
multiversal, like massive, Infinity War, Avengers Endgame.
We just need Yudias.
I would,
we have all of them.
I would love to see it, and we'll see how that comment ages in 5 years. But Rarity, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And guys, please, thank you for watching, and please let me know all your thoughts on Dark Side of Dimensions down below. Check out Rarity's channel. I'll link it in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.